Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. In this video, I want to kick things off by discussing AMD, specifically regarding the number of GPUs which will be available. And it all comes down to apparent changes in AMD's philosophy going forward with their TSMC 7nm allocation. As I'm sure you're aware, AMD contract TSMC to produce GPUs and CPUs on 7nm wafers, and we've covered this multiple times in the past, of course. But there's one thing that you should know: AMD's CPUs are going brr at the moment in the data center. Indeed, there's a couple of news stories going around at the moment that AMD's EPYC processors are very popular when it comes to supercomputers. There's a lot really to be said here of AMD's dominance in high-performance computing, and honestly it's kind of outside the scope of a news video because it's really interesting to see how the market has done a 180. If you've been following, just server processors in general, you'll know that AMD were basically, well, they just weren't present. Let's not mince words. They just were not present for a good number of years, as Intel just absolutely annihilated them. Their Opteron processors back in the day were actually pretty decent, but then they just couldn't keep up. And we all know the story of how Zen's architecture really just changed everything for AMD. However, again, the EPYC parts have a really high profit margin. And given the shortages at the moment, AMD have apparently made some changes. I'm going to read this verbatim as I think it's, well, put together rather succinctly by a Reddit user, DubDubLab. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. And these reports come to us from a couple of different websites. One is DigiTimes and the second is udn.com. Again, I'll link all of this in the video description for your perusal. So the original article, according to the Reddit post, is that Bitmain has reduced its Q4 5nm orders by about 20,000 wafers. So this equates to $300 million US, which is about 15,000 per wafer. The last paragraph talks about AMD, stating that AMD have amended its Q4 wafer allocation, without mentioning any numbers, that AMD has slightly increased wafer allocation for Milan and Rome, while reducing wafers for the APU and GPU slightly. Wafer shifts towards higher profit margins and demands for EPYC is higher than AMD have expected. There's also another report from DigiTimes, again I'll link it in the video description, that Intel, AMD and Nvidia are all slapping one another in terms of fighting for supply of substrate. But yeah, getting to the main, meat of the matter here, and that is of course the wafer supply. So this doesn't happen in isolation because there was also a really big story, I don't remember the exact date that it was published, but I believe it was earlier this year, that AMD were increasing its TSMC 7nm allocation. And this is because of multiple reasons, but one of the big ones is that Apple were reducing its 7nm allocation so that it could move towards 5nm. So technically speaking, AMD has still more GPU wafer allocation than what it would have had, but it just simply means that AMD are pushing the issue towards, high profit margin parts. And honestly, you can't blame AMD for just looking at, the profit and losses column and saying, well, this is giving us more monies. And I do realize it's frustrating for people, especially because of all of the shortages. However, there is some good news, and that is that when it comes to Nvidia's allocation, supplies are getting better. Recently I had an exclusive that told me that the supply would dip slightly in early July. However, it would start to climb and get much better, especially as LHR products started to flood the market. And there have been a couple of news stories since I reported that seem to confirm this, including Nvidia pushing a lot of 3060 Ti's for the Asian market. But this is mostly to satisfy the demands of internet cafes. However, the numbers would still continue to increase for other products as well, to my understanding. And ultimately, this means that Nvidia should be in a much better position to satisfy the GPU demand. So this is going to mean a very interesting set of decisions for people, because it could just simply be easier to pick up a Nvidia card in a couple of months' time versus an AMD card. Of course, first of all, the story that we're reporting here regarding AMD shifting its focus towards EPYC, or further focus anyway towards EPYC, could be wrong, but personally I don't think it is. Just kind of reading between the lines, it makes sense. And again, AMD are a for-profit company. Of course, it will lead to frustration of customers, but ultimately, I think AMD have quite a lot of goodwill with the RDNA 2 series of cards anyway, so for them to slightly reduce the availability of the cards, for them to make a whole lot more money for, for selling their CPUs, it probably makes sense, especially when you have to consider that AMD are also vastly increasing its research and development at the moment. Like, the budgets for R&D have increased massively. And I also want to throw in a couple of other small things that I've been hearing about AMD, and this is just kind of a bonus thing. So one big deal is that yet another source has told me that RDNA 3's ray tracing performance has increased significantly. I wasn't given specific numbers, only that for RDNA 2, ray tracing was kind of considered, it was a nice feature that they wanted to include for the feature reason, but they didn't feel that ray tracing games would be the mainstream at that point. Like, they were looking at the most popular titles. And of course, this is going to change in, let's say, 2 years' time, when, RDNA 3 will be on the store shelves. And again, it's nothing new. I've said that RDNA 3's ray tracing performance is going to be considerably better multiple times at this point. But since I'm covering AMD news, I'm just throwing it in here. And I'm basically just telling you guys that, yeah, another source is telling me RDNA 3 has really good ray tracing performance. It's apparently much, much better than RDNA 2. And the second thing is I'm hearing about the 6600 series of GPUs. There have been a couple of very interesting news stories breaking around that recently anyway, including AMD themselves basically confirming the ROP count for Navi 23. But I was told that the 6600 XT is actually going to outperform NVIDIA's RTX 3060 Ti. And we're basically going to be seeing kind of the launch in the not too distant future. So again, that's just a quick bit of bonus news for you all. Hey all, it's Future Paul, aka a news story broke right after I was done recording and filming, and in fact editing was finished as well. But this one's quite interesting, as Intel have confirmed that DG2 is now sampling. Credit to videocards.com for this discovery, as Intel have been hosting various conferences, of course, discussing their plans for different market segments, but most recently they've been really pushing graphics. Raja Koduri has been teasing a lot of the plans for Intel graphics, but yeah, we've heard very little about DG2, at least anything concrete, but now they have confirmed that they are actually sampling DG2. There is no release date, but basically they're going to start sending them out to their partners, which possibly does indicate that the cards will launch this year. I'm hearing that Intel have already booked a huge amount of memory, like 3 million plus GDDR6 memory modules, which is going to, of course, be integral to the creation of these products. But again, I've heard that DG2 is going to be a mobile-focused product at first, but then launched later in discrete. I'm going to be very interested to see whether this is true or not. And I guess the other question is, outside of even things such as performance, which of course is very important, but outside of performance, just how good will Intel's drivers be? What will the marketing be around this? And overall, I'm just very curious if it does become discrete quite early on, how the market will just kind of embrace this. Obviously, with the shortages at the moment, you could argue that the peak time to have released this product was like a month or two ago, but unfortunately, just because you want something to be ready in terms of silicon, well, yeah, it takes time to bring things up. So I'm hoping that this is an excellent product, whether it ends up being mobile first, or discrete first, or simultaneous release. The other thing too is that we can expect benchmarks to most likely leak in the next couple of weeks, maybe a month or two at absolute maximum, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the performance is on these parts. Next up, a quick thing for Nintendo's Switch Pro, and that is that the Switch Pro, or Super Switch, whatever it ends up being called, it could be called Mario's trousers at this point, it allegedly is not going to launch this year. In fact, another YouTuber, Switch Up, is stating that it's not going to launch until 2022 from what conversations he's been having for peripheral manufacturers. Now, that's actually later than what I've been told. I was told that most likely we're going to see it launch around the holiday season for this year, but ultimately, it could be that Nintendo are just holding this thing back because of numerous reasons. It could be that they are holding it back because of software, because one of the things I was hearing when I was reporting about the Switch Pro and the fact that, well, it existed, is that, yeah, it's going to have exclusive titles. And so it's very possible that Nintendo want to kind of, at the very least, release a couple of really big games which are Switch Pro enhanced, because that would make sense to obviously help sell the unit. Reason 2 is that Nintendo are just going to sell a high volume of Switch Pros. We can argue all day long that the PlayStation 5 or Xbox are brilliant consoles and that their lineup is stellar, but it doesn't really matter how many exclusives Sony or Microsoft have on their systems. The bottom line is that the proposition of the Switch is just too good. The fact that you can take it with you, and of course Nintendo's own games like, well, Zelda for example, the system is just going to sell like hotcakes. So Nintendo definitely want to make sure that the console, well, it basically can meet the demands of the console. While we're on the subject of Switch Pro, just another quick thing regarding the SoC. Allegedly, we're seeing Black Knight being associated with the device in terms of a codename, and this is according to Copper27 Kimmy. Again, I will link that in the video description, along with the tweet regarding the Switch Pro's release date. And finally, Intel's Alder Lake Igor's lab has revealed a ton of details of the LG A1700 socket. I don't want to spend too long on this because, quite honestly, some of this content is kind of dry, but if you're interested in just kind of how this socket compares versus the predecessors, well, you can now understand that. There's even details on how to design the coolers, like maximum pound forces that the cooler can kind of, or rather the CPU and socket can actually tolerate, and I'm sure you will agree that understanding how much you can pound something is very important when designing anything, honestly. Yeah. Don't really want to go further into that one. Anywho, and I think that's just about it for this video, guys. So hopefully you have enjoyed it. Leave a like on the video because, well, it helps us out because it's YouTube, and subscribe if you've not already done so. Also, comment down below how you're finding getting hold of a GPU right now, if you're in the market or if you've got one recently. A number of people I've been speaking to have actually had much better luck at the moment procuring a graphics card with MSRPs not quite as crazy. So let me know how you're getting on, and if you have gotten a card, comment down below where you've purchased it and maybe it'll help someone else out. With that said, thanks very much, take care of yourselves, bye for now.